In a world of fractured stories, timelines buried, and truths erased, one project dares to ask the question, what if everything you thought you knew about history was wrong? This is GTR, Genesis, Timeline and Roots. A 5,025-year simulated walkthrough tracing a melanated Adam back to 4000 BC. Over the last decade, new revelations confirm a black origin for humanity, from European vaults to tribal memory, Babylon to Britain. This is not just history, this is a challenge, a simulation, a movement. Meet the man behind GTR, Dr. Wilton MacDonald II, Caymanian, British, Jamaican, haplogroup E and stateless for 26 years. Now a global explorer, 119 countries and counting. A hedge fund lawyer, a UK chartered accountant, a seeker of the lost archives of our people. But the question remains, if all black people came out of Africa, does that make us only African? Or are we also European, Scottish, Native American, Jacobite Hebrew, Asian? GTR exists to answer that question. You've felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. A splinter in your mind. That splinter has brought you here, to GTR. Whites can't trace their roots before the 1800s. Where's ours? Where are the tribes? The languages, the kings, the queens, the true Hebrews? Where did the giants go? Where are the Neanderthals? Angels, aliens? Why do we speak in so many tongues? Was Babel just a myth? A memory? History has holes. Hollywood has lied. The system was never made for us to remember. Only 5 to 8% of people today are white. And what about the 1800 stories and postcards of the cabbage babies? But nearly all history books center their story. That doesn't add up. Atlantis, lost cities, vanished civilizations, or were they erased? Try GTR. Take the red pill and awaken to the truth of your ancestors. Or take the blue pill and keep dreaming a fantasy. GTR. A simulated walkthrough of Black Hebrew history and eschatology. This is the beginning of remembering.
Wow, it's been a few months. I know I first reached out, and good to meet. I'm in Poland. It's now coming up on 9 o'clock. Welcome to GTR, Genesis, Timeline, Roots, and this would be episode 18 in our 18th week of filming Genesis, Timeline, Roots. So it's a casual interview. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, and for me, it's a journey, it's an experience. Just unraveling and unpackaging everything. As I wrote to you in the comments, that I was always searching for my namesake, or what it is to be a McDonald. I can't escape the name. It's on almost every corner, and it's a McDonald's restaurant. And being told that I just got my name from a slave master. And then when I have done the deep diving, including DNA research, including opening up graves in Jamaica with licenses, including deep dives. I uncovered so much, and even testing the supposed white haplogroup R McDonald's, the ones that have sold Armadale. They have sold the farm essentially. They don't match all of the indicators, not just my opinion, but senior people at Family Tree DNA, at senior research sites. They just do not connect the R's. I've seen it. If they're from a certain village and specific location, yes, and naturally they're men, they will match. The Y chromosome matches, not autosomal. They don't match. It is this discovery that I've led really down this path. My mom is a very simple case. She's Indian. She knows her roots, from India, born in Jamaica. But my father, he is a white. Potts is on his mom's side. That makes him 20% white. But then the father is that 80% black. It's to unpack that. What I've seen directly from Scotland, and it's not me. My oldest relative is Da Costa. He's 108. He's still alive, and he is a haplogroup E. E, which is supposed to be A in the alphabet, but they pushed it into E. Yeah, welcome. I mean, I just would like to go through intros. I mean, you go ahead first, introduce yourself, and let's sort of crack on.
Well, my name's Guy Anderson, and I write and talk about Tartaria. It's a subject that I've been fascinated in for the last 6 years, but I've been researching conspiracy theories since the 1980s. I've been down every rabbit hole you can think of. My latest book, I'm not sure if you've read any of my work, but my latest book, Conspiracy Theories from Agatha to Zombies, includes 87 of my favorite rabbit holes that I've researched. But most people know me for Tartaria, although I've studied human cloning for a lot longer than anything else. And yeah, so now I give talks all over the UK, and also I'm going to start speaking in Europe and then America this year. So most people know me as the Tartarian man. That is 90% of my life now is dedicated to that, with 10% dabbling in other areas as well.
Very, very good. Well, again, by way of intro, Dr. Wilton McDonald. I'm a tribal chief in Nigeria, a prince last year. I'm a lawyer in 8 countries, and working on the 3rd PhD, which is focusing on this area, my namesake, which I've devoted to 5 years of research, looking at DNA testing in independent labs in Europe, in the Caribbean, globe, again, looking at the extensive matches in more than 150 cases, all men, Y chromosome research, and just looking at cross-section, white, Indian, or white Asian, so all races, because Caucasoid, Mongoloids, Negroids, if you want to sum it up in those 3 boxes. But then where are the Hispanics? I always ask myself, there are 3 boxes. But this has been challenging because I get a lot of pushback, and I got a lot of pushback. Even Facebook restricted an account, and I had to create a new one, and I'm very careful now. Even today, I got a restriction on the new account just because I tried to find more than 5 friends. So they have put a very, very strict noose on my account, should I, deviate off the path. So I'm treating it with kid gloves. I know that I'm a lawyer, again, with my types. I'm not doing any abusive speech or harassment or any of the nasty stuff. It's just talking about cabbage babies, talking about Tartaria. And the whole subject of Tartaria, there are groups that call themselves the Maroons that are trying to breathe new life into the whole concept, relying on old treaties. And I'm seeing it more in the Americas, the indigenous people saying, well, we are former Tatar, we are Maroons, we have this access to the treaties, the Maroon treaties, and where the U.S. agreed with Morocco, the Moroccan sort of treaty, and they're trying to claw back some of these sovereign rights. But that's where kind of the world is going. We see a lot of indigenous people rising up and trying to now assert and say, well, where's our share of the economic pie? 58 million millionaires, and 2% would be black. So you see that the economics they don't favor blacks at all. I mean, you look at the last 100 years, every effort has been from burning down Wall Street to just throw, I mean, casting aside, coming up with Jim Crow, images of black and who blacks are, what blacks are, even akin to animals and all these, you could see all the derogatory statements made on blacks. So what are your thoughts about your thoughts about Tartarian? I understand that, but I would love to delve into the whole, how far back do you know about cloning? Because with chimeras and the pig DNA, which I'm doing some research to find out what combinations were used to create cabbage babies. But the base of my research is, as you could see, this profile. This is the Moorish quadrille. This is a painting that is not on display in Dresden, Germany. And it shows these four king nobles. I mean, Sweden, Carl Gustav, Augustus Strong of Poland. This one is Friedrich von Eckstedt, Germany, and this one is Dominik Lublinski from Poland. And I visited his castle. And when I visited the castle in Poland, all 8 faces have been taken off. And I've seen this in my journeys in 130 countries. I've seen North Africa, 3,000 images of faces removed just to disguise that they were black people. And what are your thoughts about the blackness of Europe?
Well, first of all, have you read any of my work?
I read the cabbage, the cloning. There's a book on Tesla. I saw the face of Tesla on one of the books. I bought it on Kindle.
That's got the sort of the basics in it, but I expanded upon cloning in the sequel, which is called Rise of the Clones, and I've traced cloning back 250,000 years.
And 150,000 years. Now, on the demographic side there, Guy, would you say that we had 150,000 years of humanity?
250,000 years.
But then when the UN reports that 150 million people were on the planet around the time of Christ.
I don't acknowledge anything that the UN or mainstream say about anything at all.
Okay, but on the demographic data, how many people were roughly on the planet during the time of Christ?
We don't know. We don't know, because you can't believe anything that's provided to us. All of the information we're given is falsified. So nobody has the answer to that.
Do you believe that we have about 8 billion people on the planet, or you think
no?
The number is
no. Yeah, I would say perhaps a third of that.
A third of that would be real, so people. When the modern, as we know it, the cabbage babies in roughly 200-300 years ago, when did that start? And then why did it start? I read some of your work about the mud floods, and then Tartarian had the need to kind of their global reset, and then having people to work. They have to actually do the work to demuck, and out of that reset period. That's, what is it, late 1700s, early 1800s?
The last great reset was 1776. And between then and 1876, 3.35 billion people died. So they needed to repopulate, ready for the Industrial Revolution, which was reverse engineering badly Tartarian technology. So they needed people. And so they cloned. They took the orphans. They made children orphans. They took the orphans and redistributed them. And then from Germany, they were cloning in places called kindergartens. And that's where the kindergarten and doppelganger originates from. So it was a mass cloning program, all orchestrated by the Jesuits.
And we see postcards that were coming out of Russia, and then languages like in French. So when did those postcards start coming out? Because some people say the very early 1800s.
No, it was the late 1800s, and they originated from Germany. They then became popular in Europe, France more than anywhere, traveled into Britain, and then became huge in America. And they all depict cabotage law and children being grown in cabbage patches. And that follows, as you probably know, follows Slavic law. The symbolism with the cabbage and the womb and so on. But there is also cabotage law, very, very prevalent within the postcards too.
This is for me fascinating. My wife is Polish and I live in Poland. And when they see a stork, they call it bochan. They're like freaking out. They're like, oh, bochan, bochan. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's a little bird. I mean, we were driving here. I mean, I'm driving like they just see the nest and it's good luck. And they really hold to those symbolism and you know, the whole bird stork story. And they really tune in. And my wife has no history. No one in her town called Garvolin has a Zelehof, and they have no history beyond 1890s. They're just really no history.
Most people don't. 80% of people don't have true genealogy past the 1800s, and whatever they find online will be fictitious.
So the census of US, there was a fire, the 1890 census I read somewhere, and also the fire in Northern Ireland that burnt up, like destroyed Celtic records in the 1920s before the Racial Integrity Act was. Do you think those are deliberate events, like the 1890, there's a fire?
If you pick any town or city in the world, they'll have had a fire around the same time. They all did. Every single one of them had a fire. And that was not just to destroy records, but also it destroyed certain buildings too. So it was a two-pronged attack. They wanted to get rid of records and they wanted to get rid of certain buildings that they couldn't explain.
I'm on the color, just the color, because today, according to, UN report, they said about 8 to 10% of, you said, whites today, again, this non-Hispanic whites. That's what they throw out of the 8 billion. What do you think the Tartarian people looked like?
All different creeds and colors. But obviously Tartaria is Russia and Asia predominantly, going into Eastern Europe and Western Europe. So what we would consider to be sort of Russian and then moving into sort of Asian, that is Tartaria. That's the region. It's their ethos that's traveled across the world, but the people themselves, I mean, you know, perhaps the most famous ruler of Tartaria would be Genghis Khan. But of course in amongst that we've got the Moors as well. They all come under the same umbrella that we call Tartaria, but there's lots of different different creeds and colors incorporated it under that umbrella. But Tartaria itself, those people were actually Slavic, but the knowledge was passed through the Aryans, which as you know means lordly or priestly, which came originally from Atlantis. So they're sharing sacred geometry and the knowledge of frequency, vibration, and harnessing energy from the ether, telluric energy. That was passed through the Aryans, but the original Tartarians were Slavic.
And what do you think then about this painting? And this was supposedly painted in Warsaw, Poland, here in the year 1706, or I call it 706, but 1706. What do you think about the painting, about the characters in it, and their colors? I mean, naturally, they're black. They're referred to as Moors. Do you think this is not on display, but it's in Dresden Museum of Ethnology? A lot of things are not on display, but this one in particular is not on display.
Yes, I think that most of the royal households were black. They've whitewashed our history, and this again was done by the Jesuits. The World's Fairs are a good example of that. They put indigenous people on display and labeled them as savage and primitive, and this was purposely done so the Jesuits could show the rest of the world that it was the Caucasians that were advanced, that were building everything, that all of the Moorish architecture we see all over Europe and across America, that was done by the founding fathers and the original people that came across the early settlers in America, and it's just not true. So they've whitewashed history, and that's why you'll often see with statues that the noses are broken, the faces are damaged all across the world. So yes, the original rulers, all across the world, all of the households, they weren't white. And this is what they've tried to hide.
Because, I mean, genetically, I'm not a geneticist, but from seeing myself change as a part Indian and a little bit of white, but my kids who are clearly half white, married to a Polish woman, I can see the features changing every week, almost going every month. I see them literally becoming more curly, darker skin. I see the changes taking place right away as far as black being dominant. I'm not trying to say superior. I'm not making a case of superiority, but just the dominance of the melanated figure. I can see it behold in my kids and many, many people who I know who have that mixed relationship. They started one thing and end up being darker with curlier hair, and their features do change over time. To me, I'm just trying to figure out, like, they had zoos, human zoos in Belgium. And I saw some photos of a white girl feeding a black girl a banana. And I've seen that. That did happen. What are your thoughts about the human zoos? The blacks were in the cages being fed?
Yeah, I've written about it. That happened in all the world's fairs too. So that's not just Belgium, that happened everywhere. And that's what they had on display at the world's fairs all over the world, America more so. But that's that's exactly what they did. You're right. That was happening.
And do you have any comment about the people who claim that the land of Israel is for them and only them because they claim Zionists? I gave up on the labels.
Well, the original Middle East, of course, is America. That's the real Middle East. So what we're talking about is the fake Middle East. And Israel, as you know from the Balfour Declaration, was really formed for the Rothschilds to have their own country that they could control and operate out of, and that's what Israel is. It's the Rothschilds' homeland that they got through conversion to Judaism and through a series of wars that they orchestrated and financed. The First and Second World War, you know, the Balfour Declaration was implemented by the Rothschilds, and so they could have their own home turf. And if you look at anything like anything that's going on right now, I mean, look at Trump. You know, his money, when he's been bankrupt, has come through the Rothschilds via Israel. So Israel is kind of the distribution center of everything bad that the Rothschilds want to subject the rest of the world onto. That's what it is.
And I hate to again jump again, but look at Epstein. On your point, look at the money and look at the disgrace and what's happening. People being stripped. The Harvard guy Summers and Prince Andrew. All these figures are toppling. Do you see like a domino effect happening here and sponsorship?
No, I think what they're doing is they're just, I mean, you know, if you look at the Epstein files, you know, Trump is mentioned 56,000 times. So what they've done is they've picked a few people that we can target. The public are then happy because people are being held accountable for what they've done. And Andrew Windsor has been stripped of his, you know, his title. That's diversion. They wanted a scapegoat. They've got one. But what they're not doing is really looking at what Epstein, who, as you know, was a Mossad agent, he's back in Israel now, what he was really doing, which, of course, was cloning. That's the whole purpose of the of Epstein's role. He was using DNA from people that went to his island and partook in sexual activities. He was using their DNA spliced with his own to clone. And I can't remember the exact figures, but was it about 20 people a day that were being artificially inseminated with his clones at Zorro Ranch? It's something like that. Hundreds of young girls as young as 14 years old. So that's the Epstein thing. But of course, Iran was going to happen sooner or later, but it wasn't planned to happen this quickly because Iran is about 15-minute cities. It's a part of Agenda 2030. You know, you cripple the economy, people can no longer travel, afford to travel, so they stay at home. Their mortgage payments go up, the cost of living goes up because of fuel. So people have to sell their homes, they rent instead, they live literally hand to mouth on the poverty line, can no longer afford to use their vehicle as much. So Iran is the mechanism for the implementation of the 15-minute cities. So that's what Iran is about. But the reason that they did it so soon, because it wasn't supposed to happen until later on this year, was to stop people talking about the Epstein files, because people had started to dig further than the 2 million files that had been released. They started to dig further and were using software to remove what had been blacked out from the files. And of course, they were starting to see Trump, other members of the royal family, We know Elon Musk was up to his eyeballs in it. We know Andrew was introduced by Elizabeth and Philip Windsor. Charles is implicated in it. It is everyone. So before people got too submerged into digging further into Epstein, they needed a distraction. So they got Trump to stage this fake war in Iran. Because it's brought the whole world to its knees. No one's talking about Epstein now. They're talking about Iran and fuel and so on. So that was the reason that happened recently and not later on in the year.
And carrying that thought, where do you see it end game, like in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? Where do you even see? Because I know it's hard to plan from the next year. We're going through this change in the next 5 to 10 years. What's that end game? Call it 20 to 2030.
World War III. They're going that's where this is headed. There'll be a series of staged wars, and sooner or later someone will press the red button. The last time they nuked us was in the late 1700s, early 1800s, when we were nuked before. And they're going to do that again. But the last nuclear attacks, if you like, were really sort of mid 1700s, but they carried on going until 1811, into 1812. So that's what they'll do. They'll end up hitting the button. But between now and then, we can expect more vaccination programs, more outbreaks, more pandemics, so they can get the injections into people, crank up 5G, then 6G, so they can depopulate.
It's metal. It's some kind of metal.
And HIV too.
I took the vax. I was in Pfizer, the jabs. I took 2 jabs. So it's the metal. They said that it's allowing technology to communicate with the body or so. That's what I've been told.
Yeah, it's nanotechnology, and it communicates with 5G and 6G. So they can get the nanotech to actually do lots of different things. It can actually cause blood blockages, because they can get them they're magnetic. They can actually get them to clump together to cause a clot, a hemorrhage, aneurysm. But mainly it's targeting respiratory issues and weakening at the same time your immune system, because a third of the vaccines had the HIV virus in them and the rest was saline solution. So you've got the brown rattlesnake venom, the brown snake venom in it as well. Lots of things, but only a third of them had that in. 2/3 was saline solution. So it was kind of an exercise really to see whether or not people would fall for it.
Is there, I know a lot of people have died. I've known a lot personally.
Yeah, likewise.
It basically exacerbates your weakness, as I see.
Yes,
I'm not a medical.
That's the HIV. Yeah.
Your weakness. Now, I have had some issues with, say, lungs. I mean, I just picked up, say, where's the cutoff point where you think that you might be in the clear, if this is a thing, just by the 2 jabs? Where you think might be those cutoff? I don't know if I got a placebo. I had it in Poland. But when you think is that cutoff, it's now 5 years into it. 5 years into it. I mean, I've been in good health. I exercise, I do things. But for, again, people who have taken it, when is that cutoff? Is it year 6, year 7, when you think that it's kind of okay, or it's never going to be?
I've no idea. But there are people out there that have put together antidotes for this, so you can flush them out. But look, there are lots of natural remedies out there, but I would suggest people do their research. Obviously not bloody Google. It's not something you can Google, but there are people out there that have.
What's a natural thing that you heard of? Just heard that will help. I heard red wine helps. What have you heard that's a natural thing for?
Oh, tobacco, natural tobacco, not cigarettes, but actual natural tobacco. People who smoke were less likely to be affected by the respiratory problems. But of course, COVID isn't a real virus. There is no virus called COVID. It doesn't exist. COVID was basically something that they came up with. So they were getting people who had the winter flu to take the winter flu jab, and it's the chemicals within the winter flu jab that reacted with the 5G and created respiratory problems. So there is no COVID. There isn't a virus called COVID. It doesn't exist. It just made up. And what happened in China when we saw people dropping on the street was these people had the winter flu vaccine, And at the same time, 100 5G masts were fully turned up in China. And we saw people dropping down in the street, collapsing. That was what started the pandemic and ultimately the lockdown and the vaccine program. When the vaccine came along, it was just the winter flu jab again. So there isn't a COVID vaccine, it's the winter flu jab, but dressed up, rebranded as the COVID vaccine, because they want to get these agents in the body that, one, weaken the immune system, and secondly, react with 5G, but more so with 6G, to create problems with respiratory issues.
So you live in the UK now. I live in Poland. Are we both?
I live on England. I don't live in the UK.
Okay,
UK is a corporation.
Okay,
I'm not part of
England.
that. So yeah, but yes, you're quite right. I'm in the UK, but actually I live on England.
England.
I don't live in it, obviously, because I'd have to build a tunnel and go underground. I live on England, but yes, the UK is just the name of a company.
So some people say Africa, Kenya is safe. We're talking about World War III. You gave that really grisly outlook when where we're heading, where we're trending. So I live in Poland. You're on England. Are we safe at all?
If you were in Europe, the best place is always going to be Portugal. Portugal have never got involved in any of this. They didn't get involved in the First or Second World Wars. They took a far more relaxed view to the pandemic. They're not really that interested in the World Economic Forum. So I would say Portugal in Europe is probably the best place to be. They say throughout the world, the best place you can live to avoid any of this nonsense is actually New Zealand. But there'll be remote places everywhere that you're safe from. There are little islands off the coast of Scotland where you'd be absolutely fine. But of course, it's harder then to work unless you can work from home, harder to get supplies and food and so on. It's harder to survive in these remote places. And this is why, we're seeing so many of these parasites and the parasites' friends building bunkers. They're preparing to go underground. And what I personally think we should do is, if we find ourselves in a situation where that's happening, where war is imminent and people are starting to go underground, then my idea is that we take the bunkers from these people and we go in them.
I'm sure there are several in Poland too.
Yeah, well, we'll have those as well. We will take them. I mean, I'm sure somewhere on the line we paid for them, so we will have the bunkers and they can stay up here.
And a continent like Africa, do you see Africa prospering at all? It has taken so many beatings in the last 100 years.
I don't know. It's not something I research.
They did say that Kenya, when there's a globe and the flood, when the tides rise, Kenya will be one of the places that would be considered a safe haven.
Right.
Flood.
I've always kind of thought Ethiopia myself, but it's not something I research. As I was saying earlier on, I sort of spend 10% of my time looking at other areas like the World Economic Forum, Agenda 2030, Agenda 21, Epstein, and so on. 90% of my time is spent writing, talking, and researching Tartaria. So I only sort of dip into other things. So I'm not brilliantly knowledgeable in other areas because Tartaria has become so much of my life.
Tell us then, in the audience, about how Tartaria was at this high point before the dismantling, before the mud floods. What were some of the things? I was hearing things like tuning and frequencies for healing and free energy and airships. Just paint a picture, as you would, about what they enjoyed, the kind of lifestyle that they had back then before the reset, before 1776 rolled in.
Well, it's referred to quite often under different names. One is the millennial reign of Christ, and that was 1,000 years where people lived in a higher frequency, and that's connected to the fluid that's released that travels down your spine, Christos. So people were living in a higher vibration. There was a higher level of oxygen in the environment, and people would go into buildings, certain buildings, where they would heal, and and their music would be played on organs that balanced your organs. all played at 432 hertz, which is the frequency of the earth itself. So they went into these buildings where the organs would play, and they were working with cymatics and frequency and vibration. These buildings were huge centers of healing, and they were actually power stations designed to actually hold energy within them, and that was amplified within the people that were inside these buildings. So you would go in there and meditate, and the music that was playing would kind of balance your chakras, so to speak. These buildings were called cathode rails, but the Jesuits changed them into places of worship called cathedrals. People never used to go to churches or cathedrals to pray. You know, anyone who studied the Bible will already know that you're not supposed to go somewhere to pray. You do it on your own in private. You don't go somewhere else to do it. And that's what happened. The Jesuits took these buildings over. The windows themselves, each of the round windows on cathedrals and churches, you'll see a completely different design. Every single one in the world are different. And that is the structure of water, a molecule of water, when looked at under a microscope, when it's subjected to different frequency sounds. So these windows were created by somebody that had that technology, which throws the date of their construction out of the window if we follow the mainstream narrative. If these were built when we were told they were built, it predates the microscope. But that isn't the case. They're obviously far more advanced. So the millennial reign of Christ, which is the Tartarian era, ran from 25 BCE to 976 CE. 976 is actually the year 1776, when the last Great Reset took place, but they'd added 800 years. So that's how Tartaria span time-wise, 1,000 years. So the people lived in a much higher vibration and frequency. They were well, they were happy, they were more productive. There was no disease. They didn't have any outbreaks or disease, and they were able to control their environment too by they had on the top of buildings what looked like onion domes. You see them a lot in Russia. They're called singing bowls, and each one's a slightly different shape and makes a slightly different sound in the wind. And when air travels across them, it's a bit like blowing over the top of a bottle. They made a sound. That sound traveled a certain distance, and that would control the environment, the actual atmosphere, and the weather within a determined radius of the buildings. When you had them aligned following the golden ratio, which the cities were built upon, then the whole city inside those buildings, the area inside the city itself, everyone within it was euphoric. They didn't have disease, birth rates were up, and they didn't have anxiety. There was no war, no theft, because everybody was constantly in a higher state of vibration and frequency. By removing those bowls, changing the bells in the churches, and then spiking the grid, which they did using direct energy weapons, they disrupted Earth's electric circuit board, ley lines, for want of a better expression. So that's how they lived. They were peaceful people. There weren't there weren't wars. What people have told about Genghis Khan is a complete fabrication. He introduced the passport to give Europeans free travel into Tartaria with his blessing and his protection. So whilst you were European traveling around Tartaria and exploring, you had a document that said that should anybody harm you or interfere with your travels and your business, they will personally answer to Genghis Khan. He also introduced the practice of every religion in Tartaria. So it didn't matter what religion you were. He allowed that to be practiced without any repercussion, without ridicule, without persecution. A complete inversion, and that's why there are these huge links between Genghis Khan and Jesus. There are massive connections between the two people. So that's how they lived. They were in a much higher vibration. A lot of them were taller because there was a higher level of oxygen in the atmosphere until they spiked the grid. and that stifled our growth and the growth of vegetation. Some people refer to it as the empire of free travel, and that's because of the airships and the fact that you didn't have maritime and admiralty law and cabotage law restricting people's movement. So people were traveling across the world in airships freely. And so they lived in a very, very different way to us. But of course, while that's going on, you've got the Rothschilds who go all the way back to Amun-Ra and Marduk, the Anunnaki, wanting to take power away again. So for a very long period of time, they started to intercept groups of people, infiltrate societies like the Freemasons and the Illuminati. But their real clincher was taking control of the Vatican, of the Roman Catholic Church, the Edomites originally, who were the Romans. They took control of that when it was bankrupt, and by doing that, they then were able to hijack religion and then infiltrate into every town and city to remove all traces of Tartaria and its history. So it was kind of a very, very long, drawn out plan that got them to where they are now.
And so did they have any gods that they worshipped at all? Because I know the marble images that I've been seeing today, and I researched that they were using plant extracts to soften the marble. Some of those feats that they could shape marble like pressing flesh. There's a documentary and even one channel called Tartarian Unearthed that shows that the marble figures were made, the technology in the area of Tartaria. Like, were they their gods, for example? They were created during that time. Who did they worship during this Tartarian period? Was there like a god or gods maybe that they worshiped?
They allowed the practice of all religion. So they were all different religions, different belief systems. And that was what Genghis Khan had introduced. He had introduced the ability to, or not the ability, the freedom rather, to practice any religion. But ultimately, if you look at where they were actually originated from, originally, they predate religion, because Tartaria really is an echo of Atlantis that predates religion. So the gods, as you probably know, the god in the Old Testament is Amun-Ra. That's why we say amen. We're saying Amun-Ra. So this is going back to it wasn't, although they were practicing different religions, the origin of Tartaria is Atlantean, which predates all religion.
And so I just wanted to say, this marble and just the making of the marble, what was the point in making these images? Because they didn't necessarily look like the people and the way that were done. I mean, this technology is not around. Why was it done, you think? And these images, all these sculptures in the Vatican all around the world about Diana and different gods, who made them? Was it during that period?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that happened afterwards. They're petrified. They are Tartarian people inside those statues. So they're covered in liquid marble, a geopolymer that resembles marble or in some cases granite and other stones. So they basically took people, real live people, and they're petrified. So they're trophies. That's what they are. So these sculptures are not sculptures at all. They are actual people, and I've got photographic evidence of that. I've been researching them for a long time, and I found bones in broken parts of the sculpture of these sculptures and statues. I've actually found finger bones, arm bones, all sorts. So that's what they are. They're not actually statues, so to speak. They're the petrified remains of just random people.
But you mentioned that the year, is it 976 at the end, became 1776?
Yes, 800 years were added during the 1700s.
So what about the stories of the Norman conquest or the Magna Carta?
Yeah, it's all make believe.
Tudor age, the fighting with the Crusades, and then the Henry VIII, and then Elizabeth I.
Henry VIII would have been black. Up until Queen Victoria, Queen Victoria was the first Rothschild to sit on the throne. Before her, the British monarchy were black, as they were across Europe too. They're not real royal. So everything that we've been told about Henry VIII and anything like that, it's sort of complete fabrication. It never happened. He didn't exist.
Because they uncanny. If you look at Queen Victoria, and she died in 1901, and the Victorian age, there's question marks whether her ethnicity was mixed. I mean, the photographs and stuff. I don't know if you have a take on Queen Victoria, because
yeah, she was a Rothschild.
But what color really was she?
White. She had to be. The Rothschilds wanted all of the monarchy, all of the leaders throughout Europe. They whitewashed our history. They wanted to make it look like white people had always been the dominant race throughout Europe. So they created this fictitious backstory. Victoria was the first white ruler of Britain. Before that, the royal family were black, as they were across Europe. All of the monarchy were. So you know what they did was, because of what happened during the Napoleonic Wars, the Rothschilds bailed out Britain, said that we'll pay, we will finance the Napoleonic Wars. You're bankrupt, but in return, we want to cede the heir to the throne from here on. So they'd already put one of their own kings in. Selected someone to sit as king, and then after that they said they got this king in debt, into incredible debt through the Napoleonic Wars, which they financed both sides of. The Napoleonic Wars were just the Tartarians killing each other and not knowing they were doing that. So the Rothschilds, the deal was that they wanted to cede the heir of the throne from there on. Queen Victoria was the first Rothschild, and Charles Windsor is the current Rothschild sat on the throne. All European monarchs and royal families since the late 1700s have been Rothschilds. They're not royal at all. No royal blood. They
even said about the two twins, and that whole King John and the twins that were disappeared and buried in the stairs, and and they're finding new DNA about what he was. And the DNA, to me, on 5 years of research, doesn't make sense. Because what they're saying is that the whites today, or the ones in power, they came from Meso-Indians. So you're talking about like O, haplo, and then R. R is supposed to be like the universal standard, gold standard. But how does an Aboriginal man, who I tested in person, I went to the Outback, I went to Australia, I tested 2, and they came back as S. So when I look at the alphabet of how that DNA, and I know it's outside, it's outside of my area too, but they're saying that a black Aboriginal man came from a white typical haplogroup R. And then the R came from the Meso-Indian, the O. I can understand the R coming from O, but yes. How about the S? Because that's what I tested. And the Aboriginal man, how can you get a black Aboriginal man from the prototypical Renaissance kind of R haplogroup, from the R? That to me, the DNA falls apart. And there's stories of, say, Vlad Putin today, president of Russia, his brother did the DNA test and it leaked. He's an E. Can you believe that? E, the same group that I am. So Putin today, who's an E? Napoleon Bonaparte of France was an E. And I
don't think he existed, but there we go.
But they're declaring he was an E. So they have all these.
I don't think he existed.
What are the last set of kings of Europe in your mind that were, say, real and black? The last set, was it up to near Victoria, that late 1800s?
Exactly. Yeah. So what you're looking at is sort of from the mid 1700s. That's when everybody was replaced, and that's when they nuked. That's when nuclear weapons were used, and that's why you see the sudden emergence of these aristocrats and nobility wearing wigs and heavy, thick lead white makeup, because they'd lost their hair, they'd lost their teeth, and they were covered in radiation burns because the earth was still contaminated and the buildings they were residing in were contaminated. So that's when it happened. They literally annihilated the earth, and then told people that they had cholera and various other ailments and diseases to explain for the blemishes and the hair loss and the teeth loss, but actually it was the result of radiation poisoning. So they'd nuked everywhere. The parasites then stepped in, took over, put people in different households to act as monarchs, and then decided to infiltrate through money. By owing the Rothschilds money, they were then able to manipulate the rulers and start seeding the heirs to the throne. But the British throne was more important to them because we're connecting it to the British Empire, and that they had more ground to cover, more at their disposal, which gave them access to all of the countries that were within the empire at the time.
Okay, the last couple of minutes, I wanted to focus just on the cabbage babies and when that started, like as we know, the modern batch, because cloning was long, like you said, thousands of years. I get it, but the first batch of modern babies, explain that process and how they did it. And I was told that babies went to Australia or in cages, or South Africa in these cages. That to me is very fascinating, the orphan trains. Can we just spend that few minutes just unpacking that, like when it started as we know it in this current dispensation, this last 200 years, when they start pumping them out?
So this started in Germany. Germany was perhaps in the end one of the most significant Tartarian countries that existed, and up until the Second World War, it was still very much Tartarian. So they were cloning there in facilities that became called kindergartens.
And what year was this now, approximately?
This is the late 1800s.
Okay.
The late 1800s. So prior to that, between the 1776 and the late 1800s, there were a series of civil wars, the Napoleonic being perhaps the biggest, then the American Civil War, and so on. So they'd removed a lot of the population of adults. They had a lot of children, which were orphans, and they were distributed across the world and used in the Industrial Revolution. You've got the orphan train movement in America, where children were taken from Europe, Britain and Russia mainly, shipped over to America. My grandfather went from Ukraine to ended up in Pennsylvania. So you had that going on, but it wasn't enough children, so they needed to get the cloning up and running again. And that's where it happened. It happened in Germany. This is where the postcards came from, the Cabbage Patch postcards. They became known as repopulation postcards, and that somewhere in the region of 1 million babies were produced and shipped across the world. Mixed in amongst these babies were orphans as well. So they basically mixed them all in together, so it didn't look so blatantly obvious. And they were sold. The postcards became known as repopulation postcards, and they were sold all across the world. And I'll show you an example, actually. So this is Stravagance. I wonder I wonder where Mother bought it. That's an original. So yes, they were selling the babies. You could buy them. They were advertised for sale. You could win in Paris. You could win one in a competition. They used to have raffles where you could win a baby, and they were sent all over the world. The story of the convicts being sent to Australia isn't true. They were babies and children, and that's why the cages that they were in are so very small. And so they flooded, and they're called Cabbage Patch babies because it follows Slavic folklore that the baby comes from a cabbage, it's grown in the garden, and it was following that old Slavic folklore which had become really popular in Germany. So at the same time these babies emerged, we start hearing the word kindergarten for the first time and the word doppelganger. And the reason that doppelganger exists is because they were cloning en masse. So a lot of these children looked the same. And so that's where it happened. Now the children went into France. A lot of them went into France, then Britain, but the majority of them were actually shipped over to America, and they became.
And I saw some babies with some Asian looking features. No black. I didn't see any black cabbage babies.
No, they didn't clone black. They were all white. All of the babies were white.
I saw some looking Asian in some cards, in some books, in the Mind Unveiled books. They looked Asian looking.
Yeah, it was predominantly Caucasian babies, and that was because they were going to flood the New World with white people, because it whitewashed the history. They can say there was nobody here, just some Native Americans. There was nobody here. So they they were basically saying we can claim this land because it doesn't belong to anyone, fill it with white people, then say the white people built everything, which discredits the Moors, who actually did build the White House and Penn Station and Statue of Liberty and so on. So it was whitewashing, not just whitewashing history, but it was actually whitewashing the population too.
How do you connect it now? Final point with the Jews and the Jewish community. I know that is not the current place in Europe. Where, how do you connect it? Because some of them have the haplogroup of those R's.
There isn't a connection there. It's not. There isn't a connection between the cloning and Israel or the Jews. There is no connection.
But then they're claiming then that they're the children of God. They're the real Hebrews, and that's what they're genetically.
Oh yes, that's completely different to the cloning, though. That's nothing to do with the cloning in Tartaria. This is just the Rothschilds using the Jewish religion, which they converted to ultimately gain Israel. But yes, they do believe that they are the chosen people from God. But actually, if you look at it, it was the Jews that killed Jesus. So it's all nonsense. This is all just made up. And the idea is that the Jewish people have become a group of people that we're all supposed to dislike, that we're supposed to despise. Lots of people hating the Jews. It's just religion being used to divide and conquer. They aren't the chosen people. They know it. We know it. Nobody is the chosen people.
You can't test. I can't even test. They need a special court order. They can't test, and testing is not allowed. Like France, kind of iffy, but Israel, you can't really freely do a DNA test.
Well, no, the Rothschilds wouldn't allow that. But no, so this is all pushed by the Rothschilds. They needed people to believe, the world to believe, that they truly think this, that they are the chosen people, because they needed Israel. They needed Israel, so they had their own country. And if you look at what that country is used for, it traffics weapons, it traffics people, it moves incredible sums of money. You've got people being held to ransom, America giving it $18 billion every year for no reason at all. The whole idea of Israel is it's kind of the warehouse and distribution center for the Rothschilds. So they come out with this, they are the chosen ones, but they don't actually say that. It's just what we've been told. There are over 900 different religions out there, and each one of them believe that they are the chosen people of God. None of them are. It's just absolute nonsense. There wasn't religion. Religion is just a mechanism that's been introduced to give people rules and laws to make them obey. If you go back to our creation, we weren't created by gods. We were created by some bloody aliens as a slave race, and their descendants, the Rothschilds, are still running the show now. So religion was just used to give people fear and understanding that if they do what someone tells them to, they'll go to heaven. And if they don't, that they'll burn in hell. And that is the whole principle of it. But ultimately, religion is based upon the story from Mesopotamia and the Sumerian texts of the Anunnaki, an alien race coming from another planet, taking Neanderthal man, turning it into a bloody slave. Is that what you want to base your religion on? It's just absolute nonsense.
Now, this is then the final point on aliens. Admiral Byrd, he went to Antarctica. He was discredited. He saw Crystal City, and he saw someone as a master of look like an alien figure.
Yeah.
What do you think about that account? Because he was a decorated admiral, and he went to Antarctica. Operation High Jump.
What
do you think about that? And there are people living, or there's a civilization in Antarctica. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I do believe that is the case. I think that the Earth is like a lump of Swiss cheese. I think there are lots of holes and tunnels, and I think it's hollow. I think there are lots of civilizations there, and I think that's what they were doing because in the Second World War. Because if you look at what the Germans did, they were looking for Shambhala. They were sort of wandering around Tibet, looking for entrances to underground civilizations. Then they were in Antarctica doing the same thing there. Yeah, I think the reason we've been told to look up in the sky for alien life, whether it's a craft or some kind of sign, is because it's an inversion. We're being told to look up when we should look down. But so I think that they're here already, and I think they're underground and also underwater. But I do also at the same time think that Antarctica is a psyop. I think it's misdirection. How much time do we spend wondering what's going on in Antarctica and not the North Pole? I think it's the North Pole where it's all going on. That's what I think is that's what I think the Northern Lights are connected to. So I think that we've been told to focus on Antarctica. There's something there. There's something underground. It's hiding something. There are lots of anomalies. We've got Admiral Byrd's accounts in his diaries, and I think we're being pushed to look at Antarctica because it isn't there. I think the North Pole is the Arctic. That I think is where we should be looking. And you can't fly over either of them.
I was privileged enough to go to the Argentina part in Ushuaia. I left and I was there for a week and a few days. So we went through the Drake. It was terrible, but I did one trip. I managed to do that a few years, about six.
Wow,
7.
that must have been a fantastic experience.
Yes, it was a craft, an icebreaker, about 50 meters and 30 crew, and about 60 people who were guests who were on that ship. So, yeah, we saw orcas. We saw just a lot of ice, but that Drake was, that was something. Everything had to be buttoned down, everything latched up, and that was three days each way in the Drake.
So did you see anything?
It just ice. There was one shipwreck, vessel out there, some sea life for penguins, but we just went near the coast. We docked along and we were taken in those little boats, those little dinghies kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I know those little rubber inflatable boats.
Yeah.
And we're taken to shore. But, it wasn't like McMurdo. McMurdo, the U.S. side, is much more established and at least more infrastructure. But this side was really not much. The UK station was just tiny. They have these little radio, very small outposts, nothing much. We didn't go really trek inland. And that's their summer, which is the month of December, which is like -2 to +1. So that's when we went. You can't go in there in the winter, obviously, but in the summer.
Yeah.
There's some place about that temperature. So it wasn't bad, December.
There is one thing that I've always found unusual with Antarctica, and that is that we've got the Antarctic Treaty, which is signed by and adhered to by countries that despise each other. Countries that actually hate each other on paper, as far as we're told. I'm sure they're all actually the best of friends, but in theory, there are countries that oppose each other that still agree on one thing: Antarctica. They've still got that treaty and they adhere to it, but they're at odds with each other. So there's something a little bit strange about Antarctica.
It's one of those places I wouldn't mind going back again, but some people even helicopter and fly over there. But, for me, the Drake, that was something, because the wave heights was between 3 meters and as much as 10 meters. And there was rough. So I would love to do this again, Guy. I really appreciate the talk and the time taken. So look, we're all students. We're all learning. I didn't know marble can be softened, but you put a different spin on it with this.
I would recommend, if you're interested in this, then I would recommend somebody on YouTube called Roger Spurr, Spurr, and his channel's called The Mud Fossil University. Now he has found the most incredible discoveries. He's found hair follicles that are the size of an ostrich egg. Hair follicles. He's had things rocks he's had independently tested, DNA tested, and found human DNA in them. So he's been looking at petrification for a very, very long time. Certainly worth looking into that. So that's Roger Spur, and he would make a really good chat, I think, for your show, your channel. I think if you're interested in this, petrification. And incidentally, there's a place called here in England, Old Mother Shipton's Cave, Shipton, which is up towards the north of England, the place Shipton. It's called Mother Shipton or Old Mother Shipton's Cave. And there is a weird anomaly there. And what people do is they go into the cave, which is dripping with water, which obviously isn't just water. There's a lot of calcium and other things in it. And what they'll do is they'll take a child's toy, like a teddy bear, they'll hang it on the ceiling, go back in a year's time, and it's completely petrified. It's rock solid. It petrifies things almost instantly. So it's going on. So if you imagine, if I wanted a realistic sculpture and I wanted it to look like you, and I get you to sit in the position and I say that I'm going to paint a portrait of you, and then I inject you with something and you freeze where you are, you're now dead, and then you have the liquid poured over you, well, I've got a perfect statue there, you know, absolutely flawless, with every detail, every tendon, you know, absolutely everything there. And if you look at some statues that were created around the same period, in the sort of like mid to late 1700s, and then look at statues 100 years later, the quality and the detail goes downhill. It's almost like the ability to carve the perfect statue has declined. So it's certainly worth looking into. And some of the detail within what we are told is one originally solid lump of granite or marble, to create what they've done from it without using, you know, laser cutting, CNC machinery, you know, it is absolutely impossible. So yeah, petrification. But Roger Spur from Mud Fossil University on YouTube, he's the master of this subject.
I will definitely look him up, and thank you so much for the time. I look forward to another interview. I promise not to talk so much, but I'm really blown away. So
no, it's my pleasure. It's normally me. Normally, you know, so as soon as someone gets me to start talking, I don't bloody stop. So it's normally me. I do it all the time. I just get so passionate about something. Bang, you know, and I just got to get all of the information out. And sometimes I don't give the other person a chance to talk. I think they must sit there thinking, is he going to stop for a breath in a moment, you know? But when you're passionate about something, that's how you are.
Thank you, Guy.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you. Then this is episode 18, GTR with Guy Anderson. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. And I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.